So now we're going to have some fun, and while we're learning all at the same time. So we're going to move into this interactive portion, and we'll be using the Menti. So grab your cell phone or your other screen if you don't have it in front of you. These will be springboards for our interaction. And let me just explain before you get started on, well, you can get started on it, but a lot of these Mentis are going to be in pairs. So we're going to use the first one just to get your initial impressions and your thoughts about a topic and get the juices flowing. And then the second Menti will be open-ended, which will allow for some dialogue through the chat. So thanks, Adriana, for bringing up the first poll. The first pair of Mentis relates to your work. And so this is a really interesting one. It's a spider diagram, and each set of data, for example, site selection or designing adaptive interventions, has its own axis. And it takes the average of all of your inputs. So keep plugging them in. When you see the numbers getting close to 5, it means that that would be the highest level of involvement, time you're spending. And so it looks like roughly the same for site selection, working with marsh migration, and identifying, evaluating strategies. On the lower end is designing adaptive interventions, but still, you know, they're all kind of near the middle. The focal point here is the axis itself, as opposed to the spread between the axes. Just look at the numbers and that'll give you a sense. But they're all kind of, you know, roughly the same, with the exception of design adaptive intervention, a little bit lower. So keep those coming in. And keep in mind, as before we go into the next Menti, these 5 different parameters in considering resilience, and because it'll help you as we go into the next one. Give it another moment. Seems like they're evening out somewhat, which is quite interesting, that there's nothing that's exceedingly high or exceedingly low. They're all kind of in the middle. All right, I think we should probably move on to the next one. Okay, so this is an open-ended question. How should or does consideration of resilience figure into your work or your decision making? And after you complete the Menti, and it's important that you complete the Menti because this is giving us data that's going to be used for the outputs for this event. But after you complete that, you can amplify your thoughts or make observations on what you're seeing on the screen in the chat. And we'll take a look at that in a bit. So how does or should consideration of resilience figure into your work? So we've got prioritizing habitats to protect and restore. It's very important for restoration and climate adaptation. Important for ecosystem services, resilient fisheries. Needs to be fully integrated into decision making, even if it's not the primary driver. Lots of different ideas here. Community health, long-term sustainability, and keep taking a look at these, folks, because this will give you lots of ideas, and feel free to add to the chat if you have further ideas. Nature-based solution perspectives, restoration target setting. It's a critical point for restoring wetlands. Integrate into all adaptation activities, regulating tidal marshes for the future. So there's lots of different ways that people consider resilience in their decision making. It's one of the dominant drivers, and it has co-benefits to maximize partners and funding, protection of our collective future. like that one. And protecting military missions, something very pragmatic there. Why do this work if it's not going to last? The sites we select to work on, the type of project we conduct are based heavily on resilience considerations. It connects us between habitat restoration and community benefits for coastal residents. It maximizes multiple benefits, carbon sequestration, flood migration, water quality improvement, adaptive management thresholds. Lots of very interesting ideas coming up here. So, and then please, and Jordan just mentioned you can enter as many answers as you want, and this will be a real helpful response for us as we do the outputs from this. So let's see if there are anything in the chat that's coming up, Joan?
I don't see anything in the chat, Joe. I think everything has been raised in the Mentimeter so far.
Okay, well, let's keep them flowing. Thank you, Joan. Mm-hmm. Supports recreational fisheries. Trade-offs become essential from the resilience perspective. If you see something that gives you a new idea, you can add another one here.
I'm scrolling back up, Joe, just so folks can see some other ideas. We're right at 23 people have responded, so maybe we're leveling off, but I'm just gonna scroll through to see if any other ideas from what other attendees have said, if it makes you think of something else you'd like to include.
Perfect.
Whoop. We do have a couple more. I'm gonna scroll back down.
Thanks, Adriana. Okay, so we have supports record DEIJ to rethink the framework for decision making. I don't know what DEIJ is, so maybe that person could put in the chat what that is, or
That's
someone can.
Diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice.
Oh, yeah, of course. Thank you. Identifying priority areas for preservation, need to shift to a longer term perspective for resilience planning and management. Restoring Rumney Marsh. Apologize if I pronounced that wrong. All right. Well, I think we can move on. It's kind of slowing down, Adriana.
Yep.
So we'll move on to the next pair. And the next pair, let's start with this. What are the best indicators of a more resilient wetland? And you can do a ranking here.
So for this one, they just have to select their top 3. And we realize some of their choices might not be there, but then they'll have a chance to comment on that on the next Menti. So for these, you just have to pick your top 3.
Results are coming in. And as you see, they're shifting around as more and more data comes in. Looks like right now, increased acreage of unfragmented habitat is near the top, as is decreased emission rates. Increased social benefits are kind of on the lower end. Give it another minute or 2 seconds to get some more data here. Seems like most of them are on the high, pretty similar. Increased acreage of unfragmented habitat is at the top. Most of them are fairly even, and then increased social benefits is lower. So keep this in mind as we move into the next prompt.
Oops, hold on. Here we are.
Okay, thanks, Adriana. So now here's a more open-ended question. What makes your top choice of resilience indicator highest on your list? Why is it highest on your list? And are there any indicators missing that you would place even higher? So this is a chance to just put those in. And after you've completed the Menti, feel free to add to the chat.
And a reminder for this one that you can make multiple submissions. So if you have one thought, you can hit submit, and then you can enter a couple more thoughts or ideas for this question.
So migration potential would be higher. That's why I made the top choice. Elevation capital is key with sea level rise. Higher diversity provides opportunity for various outcomes. And based on local studies, local level studies, increased ecological diversity is a key indicator of wetland health for our region and ability to keep up with sea level rise. We're talking about resilience of function, then contiguous habitat, room to migrate inland is important. If resilience of a particular marsh, elevation capital is key. Again, elevation capital, we've heard twice now. Habitat optimized when less fragmented. Economic programs to promote human infrastructure retreat to allow marsh migration. Again, elevation capital allows marsh to stay ahead of sea level rise. Marshes and estuaries are nurseries of the ocean. And I think social values should have been higher because of flood mitigation benefits. Elevation of coastal marshes is a key to all other indicators. Again, elevation capital, citing a research letter. Fragmentation and elevation capital are critical to help sustain coastal wetlands. And reduced erosion rate indicates stability. And as you keep putting things in the Menti, feel free to, and you can keep adding if you see something that sparks a new idea for you. You can also be adding to the chat. Elevation is essential to marsh persistence, which again, elevation. Social values due to flood mitigation benefits. Governance and social buy-in to protection, preserve, and promote marsh resilience. Resilient coastal wetlands will provide increased social benefits. There's the social benefits again. I was surprised by the disconnect of social benefits from the other indicators. Something missing. Adjacent land use considerations when assessing marsh and migration.
I'm going to scroll up one more. Oh, here comes another one.
Yeah. Vegetation and lack thereof. Composition can be used as an indicator of elevation capital, which is difficult to measure. Yeah, that'd be great, Adriana, if you could scroll up, let people take another scan. Meanwhile, people can be putting any additional comments or elaborate on what you put in the Menti. You can elaborate in the chat if you'd like.
And we have one additional at the bottom there.
Yeah, the presence of invasive versus native plant species. Okay. Well, I think this might be a good time to. We don't see it. Is there anything in the chat, Joan? I'm not noticing.
No, there's nothing else in the chat, Joe.
Okay. Well, I think it's a good time then to shift to. We have some time now for a virtual discussion. And sort of when you think about the input that you just saw from others about how resilience figures into their work and the best indicators of resilient wetlands. So what are your observations? What questions come up for you? Do you have any questions for the speakers that have sparked for you, having seen some of the input from the members of the from the participants. So if you have something, please put it in the chat. You can also raise your electronic hand if this is something you want to say. It's a good time to hear what you have to say on these topics. Let me just explain to you how to raise your hand. You'll see on the top of the screen, there's something that says reactions with a little hand and a smile face. If you hover over that, you'll be able to see find the raise hand function. And Kathy, is there anything you'd like to mention or anything you've observed?
Yes, thanks, Joe. I was wondering if the social scientists who spoke today might comment on that disconnect in the responses for indicators of resilience, where we saw most of the resilience indicators that tended to be ecological ones were all rated fairly evenly and high, but the social benefits were, about 2 to 3 times lower. So to me, that was surprising, but also a real disconnect in the value. So I don't know if any of the social scientists want to speak to that.
I see there's a hand up. I'm not sure whether so Ed Reiner, maybe we'll hear from you after we just get a response to Kathy's question from Kate. I think if that's what you're about to do, Kate.
Yeah, and everyone else is welcome to join in as well. I think that just reflects how we do capture wetlands so far. We don't have very we haven't captured social benefits very often. So like Simona's work is really great, but it's like brand new, and Adams is still Adams is also brand new. So we're just kind of on the edge of starting to better capture some of these social benefits, and so we don't know how how well they'll be accepted and how they can be applied. But what we do know is that oftentimes like community support is based on their perceived benefits from doing so. Capturing something just in terms of ecological benefits doesn't always gain traction with a community. And so being able to connect some of those social benefits, they'll lend to resiliency in that we can better support policies, programs, and resources for wetlands.
Thanks, Kate. Did any of the other speakers want to weigh in on that question from Kathy before we turn to Edward Reiner's question? Okay, so
Joe, hi.
Go ahead, please.
So I only have one more comment. It's really difficult to monetize these ecological services for salt marshes or wetlands or any of the coastal ecosystems. But I think it's important especially since the public cannot grasp what that quite value is to them, it's important to put this common denominator, which is money or monetization, and show what the level of that value is. I think it's important. It's brand new. So we don't know how that's going to be impacting the communities, but hopefully it's going to be a positive impact.
Thanks so much, Simona. And we're very fortunate to be on so much the cutting edge. Okay, Edward, you want to unmute yourself? And
yes, hi. I wanted to mention that from a regulatory standpoint, we're not adequately regulating activities to prevent people from basically building walls at the edges of the salt marsh or elevating their land or lawns, which basically all my career as a regulator protecting wetlands, I have seen, that in fact, the Corps will choose to regulate, under the Clean Water Act, Section 404, to the high tide line. Yet wetlands can, or adjacent wetland limits, basically. but the failure to recognize the high tide line has actually increased using basically in the last 40 years. The NOAA datums are sort of out of date. And, they're based on the Metonic cycle, an average over the 19-year period from 40 years ago, basically. So it's just a failure of the system, and you have to understand that people who live next to these resources are always going to want to try to protect themselves from flooding, maybe by doing things like elevating their lawns or land if they could get away with it. So I just wanted to make that mention that the status of the regulatory protection is a little uneven across the region. That's all.
Thank you so much, Edward, for making that point about regulation and how that important role that plays. Joan, is there anything in the chat?
Yeah, there is one more comment that came in from Martha Maxwell Doyle. Not a question, more of an observation. There needs to be dedicated funding to assess and continue to monitor coastal wetlands so that the data needed can be made available. We saw in the Delaware Bay study that data was available due to a long-term monitoring program like MACWA, but in my experience, that is not the case.
Thank you, Joan. Anything else in the chat or any other questions?
Yeah, there's a post from Kevin. It looks like a website. How wetlands and living shoreline support programs and policies, Virginia.
Great, thanks. Okay. Well, I think if there's nothing further in the chat, I don't see any other hands raised. So I think it's a good time to move on. We're going to move on to now stakeholder engagement, and Adriana has put a question up there. What is the value gained from stakeholder engagement in wetlands management for resilience? And this is to get your impressions on the topic and just get some juices flowing on it. So let's see what you come in with. Ownership, buy-in. Identify potential roadblocks to implementation up front. Leadership and stewardship. You understand how the wetlands are used or perceived. This is the high value to understanding how to manage the wetland. Other values gained: longevity. Stakeholder engagement provides buy-in. Again, buy-in, public education, outreach, literacy, longevity, funding, understanding the needs and desires of the stakeholders, understanding barriers and acceptance of strategies to ensure projects are meeting community needs if possible. Again, ownership, again, buy-in, longevity, community resilience, long-term solutions, community support, education. These are great. And after you put your response in the Menti, you can also add to the chat if you want to enhance what you said. You see something else that you registers with you, feel free to add another idea into the Menti. Public support, buy-in. The stakeholders become protective of their projects. It becomes theirs. Understanding objections to projects, for example, dam removals. However, it's not a democracy. Shared understanding of ecosystem services, continued monitoring, low rigor and maintenance, community support to move adjacent projects forward. What's gained from stakeholder engagement? I guess you identify the stakeholders and the benefactors, create a larger tent. Shared understanding of ecosystem services. Post-installation monitoring, community scientists. public understanding of the value of wetlands. We've talked a lot about value. Our speakers did just a few minutes ago. Ownership and monitoring for maintenance. Chance to learn from our stakeholders and underrepresented folks. Let's keep those coming in. Meanwhile, check on the chat. Anything in the chat, Joan?
No, nothing else in the chat.
Okay. Well, we're getting some really great ideas of the value gained from stakeholder engagement here in the Menti. Keep rolling in. Understanding cultural relevance, citizen science, creating a level understanding, and building volunteer capacity. We heard from Kate earlier about I think it was Kate, one of our speakers, about the value of volunteers, stakeholders, potential for longer term and or broader support for activities. It's great. Cultural relevance. It's very important that we understand that. All right. Well, I think building capacity. I heard a bell. I think we have another minute or so, but I think we can also move on since things are slowing down. And we're going to move on to a pair of mentees on environmental justice. And the first one is just a quick one. How much emphasis does your organization put on environmental justice? And we'll see how the donut starts to change. And after that, we'll be able to explore that in more detail. So we have a larger emphasis, some emphasis, little emphasis. The donut keeps changing. No emphasis is the smallest. Some emphasis seems to be the largest. We're seeing a large emphasis and some emphasis be kind of the major ones here. That's gratifying to see. And but there are some that have little or no emphasis. Give another few seconds. Look at that, they're pretty much neck and neck, keep changing around, large emphasis and some emphasis. Okay, slowing down. So it looks like only about 9% say little or no emphasis, and the rest are between large emphasis, which is the biggest category, and some emphasis. And now we'll get to explore that a little bit more with the next Menti. And again, everything you're putting in here is going to be very useful for the outputs from this event. So for this Menti, in what ways is your organization strong in incorporating environmental justice? And in what ways could it be improved? And this is, you can put multiple answers. So just start populating these. And after you have completed the Menti, again, feel free to amplify in the chat if you'd like to enhance what you've said. If you see something pop up and you would like to put something in the chat in response to that, feel free to do that. So in what ways is your organization strong in incorporating environmental justice? How's your organization doing a great job of that? In what ways could it be improved? Okay, one organization has incorporated social vulnerability into mapped reviews. We could improve by actually implementing solutions and not just documenting problems. And it's great if you could put improve if it's something that you want to be improved, or strong, so that we're clear on which one you mean. Better hiring practices of underrepresented people in the workforce. Grant funding is driving the diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice related projects. We're building EJ into our strategic planning so that everything we do has to be viewed through that lens. It's a central focus and consideration in all our research. Here's an area for improvement, considering EJ in all planning activities. Someone's department just developed an EJ mapping tool, but it hasn't fully developed what'll be required by the applicant or the department when reviewing an application. Identifying EJ areas. I'm not sure if that's what they're doing or what they're improving, so try to make that clear when you punch in your thought. We emphasize vulnerable communities where flooding and help, I guess, where there's flooding, and help them with restoring wetlands to mitigate their flooding. Strong policy and staffing. EJ is considered in our engineering solutions. We do a whole lot of talking, but not a lot of doing. I'm sure that's something that resonates with some people here. And working towards building partnership with underserved communities and supporting the funding of green infrastructure projects. Better targeting of environmentally impoverished or degraded areas. It looks like we could improve stakeholder engagement over what we're doing. Something strong that one organization is doing is consistent methods are becoming common. And what can we improve? Develop a formal procedure for developing EJ analysis to be applied across rules and what to do with the results. Again, if you're seeing something here that pops for you, maybe put it gives you a new idea, put it in the Menti. If you have some sort of thought that comes up you'd like to share in the chat, that would be great too. Here's one that's strong in theory, in practice could have some more opportunity for minorities. One area of improvement would be to solicit input from underrepresented communities and stakeholders. Here's one where EJ has become a major recent focus, but the question is whether it will be implemented and maintained. So it could be a focus, but are we doing something about the focus? Review outreach and education materials. Looks like that's what they're already doing. Here's one improvement area, multi-generation messaging needed at the community level. Joni, you see anything in the chat?
Yes, Courtney shared a link to the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program website, Planning for Equity, I believe. It describes what the program is doing, and she indicates a bit of a spoiler from her talk tomorrow.
Well, it's great to get a spoiler. We're looking forward to that talk tomorrow, Courtney. Okay. We're utilizing NJDEP's overburdened communities mapping tool. Here's an area where we could be just doing more, which is finding or training trusted community champions, leaders, and mentors. Another area of improvement is building better relationships with local trusted partners for engaging EJ communities. Another area of improvement is to more help to towns, give towns more help that do not have grant writers. Another need is to share understanding of what EJ means and what it means to incorporate EJ into our work. Okay. Well, I think we're kind of winding down here. Feel free to add a few more if you'd like before we move on to the next one.
Joe, I'm scrolling up just a little bit in case folks want to reread some of the items that have been sent through and if they have another thought they'd like to add.
Thanks, Adriana. What's great is we have people who are from many different kinds of organizations, and we're seeing exactly what they're experiencing within their organizations for the positive and also where we could see improvement. I think it's time to move on to the next Menti, Adriana. Again, what do you see as the biggest connection between wetlands resilience and community resilience, those two. And how would you measure it? So again, the very open-ended question here. So flood protection is a connection between wetlands resilience and community resilience. Time both exist together, measured in years. The biggest connection is the societal benefits that coastal wetlands provide. Flood mitigation is, I guess, the biggest connection between wetland resilience and community resilience, and we measure that by reduction of flooding incidents. The tidally flooded backyards of houses is a strong connection, and we measure it by inches and frequency of flooding. People are the biggest connection. And I measure how people perceive their wetland, their community, and their perspective of having that wetland in their community. Wave attenuation. I assume that's a way of measuring it, or a connection perhaps. Property value. Resilient wetlands provide protection to inland communities and developments. Open space, visual aesthetics, mental health. Those are connections between wetlands resilience and community resilience. Sustainability, both for wetlands and the communities. And then here's one, directly measure, for measurement, measure societal benefits will require better valuation methodologies and better K-12 education of habitat values. I love this. Kids are the future stewards and the decision makers. So marshes provide water storage, water quality improvement, and provision of commercial fisheries. Understanding by the community of all the services that wetlands provide and their valuing of those wetlands. Anything popping in the chat, Joan?
Yeah, there's a comment from Kate. People degrade the marsh through development and climate change. They also have to decide how or if to repair, restore, adapt the marshes.
Thanks, Kate, for pointing out that connection. And we have open space and flood protection, social and economic benefits of flood protection, I presume. Under or not properly valued. I guess both community resilience and wetlands resilience are not properly valued or they're undervalued. The connection is to living sustainably to reduce environmental impacts. Adriana, do you want to go up a bit and see if there are people might want to get some more thoughts from looking at it?
Looks like we're leveling off a little bit with the responses for this one, so.
Yeah, thanks, Adriana. I think it's a good time to move on to from here, which is an opportunity again to for some observations, to think about what you've seen, what you've heard, and what the speakers have said, and what your colleagues have said, and offer some thoughts either by raising a hand or putting something in the chat. And I'm going to turn to Jordan to sort of kick this off.
No, that was perfect. I actually, rather than an observation, wanted to throw out a question. I would love any of the speakers or participants to maybe talk a little bit about, from the perspective of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and environmental justice, and social benefits. anybody have any thoughts on non-monetary valuation and cultural values and how to make those links between wetlands and communities and measure them? I would love to hear any thoughts folks have on that while you're thinking about other things to share.
Thanks, Jordan. So any thoughts about the non-monetary benefits of wetlands? And in addition to other thoughts you might like to share, either in the chat or you can raise your hand as well. Or if there are questions that have come up for you that you'd like to raise to the speakers. I see we've got a hand up. Let's turn it to Julie.
Yeah, I was just I thought the answer to Jordan's question. I think in connecting with nature, you have healthier communities. So part of that inclusion justice component, wetlands can create that connection. I know there are some projects out there that's creating wetland parks that's near like underserved communities or communities being affected a lot by sea level rise and flooding. And they're building these urban wetlands, and it's connecting the community to nature and trying to create a sort of a place of health as well for that community, along with many other benefits with water quality and also creating a better pathway to the local market. And so it's I think sort of, you know, building these nature spaces can definitely, I think, help build healthier communities.
Thanks, Julie. Really great response to Jordan's question. Anything in the chat?
Yeah, Joe, there were a couple of comments. A couple of them from Pamela, and she describes as benefits open space, natural space for mental health, and specifically describes forest bathing. And then there's an additional comment from Brian. Maryland's identity is tied pretty closely to the Chesapeake Bay. That tying what it means to be Maryland to the Bay seems to give some support to Bay restoration projects.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. Thank you, Joan. Thank you to the commenters.
So, Joe, I'd like to add there was one other. I'll reshare the Menti. Someone had mentioned Native American valuation, which promoted respect and 7th generation valuation.
Great. Thanks, Adriana, because that's something we hadn't seen before. Appreciate that. Okay. I'm not seeing any additional hands raised.
There are a couple of more comments from him, and another one is sense of place, as well as cultural values.
Thank you, Joan. Thanks, Pam, for offering that.
Yeah, there's another comment from Nicole. We should encourage communities to use these spaces for recreation, spiritual, education purposes, etc. They're here for everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you. Kathy, did you want to add something?
Yes, I just wanted to comment that this morning I was reading in the news about how here in Narragansett that the town of Narragansett has just voted in a very close vote, 3-2, to allow Narragansett tribe members to now use the ocean for free, so they don't have to pay the usual cost to enter the area where the Narragansett Bay is. And, you know, also there's dune wetlands and other things associated with that system. But it's just sort of a example of what's happening right now in communities where it was brought to the town's attention that this could be a way to allow for these Native Americans to gain back that usage that they use for for spiritual and religious reasons. But I thought it was sort of relevant to what we're talking about here and sort of a way to help educate people and future generations by actually making a change. And it was in newspapers and people are talking about it, but it was a close vote. So I just thought I'd lay that comment out there and see if anyone else wants to comment or just something we can all think about. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great example, Kathy. Thank you. And we're down to our last minute. Anything in the chat that came up as Kathy was talking?
Yes, we have a few more comments here from Julie. With these projects, measures should be put in place that we don't displace the community, that these wetlands are meant to help when working on DEIJ efforts. And another comment is education for the public about the value of wetlands in schools and public places. And then another comment, when you green a space, rent tends to go up.
Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic to be aware of. Thank you everyone for those great comments. Very, very helpful discussion, and we're ready to sort of start shifting into the wrap up for the day. But first, we're going to do a Menti. This Menti will be anonymous. It'll help us for tomorrow's session. After you do this Menti, which is very much about how can we do things better for tomorrow, you can also put ideas and thoughts that came up for you on the topics we covered today into the chat. Is there something that you want to share, a lesson learned or something like that, while we're listening to Kathy provide the wrap up? But we will have this open for a while, so you can provide the feedback. Again, the results will be hidden, they're anonymous, as we turn it over to Kathy for the wrap up.